Good morning. My name is Dee Perry, and I want to welcome you to the Westfield Insurance Studio Theater of Idea Center. You're here as part of a series of special Black History Month events presented by the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation in collaboration with Hiram College, the Cleveland History Center at Western Reserve Historical Society, and WVIZ PBS Idea Stream. We're really happy to have you here with us today. And again, welcome to our students from Warrensville Heights High School and from CMSD's Campus International Middle School. Also, we have viewers on the WVIZ live stream from Jane Addams Business Center, East Cleveland's Shaw High School, and St. Mary's School in Chardon. Now, our students here in the studio, as John Ramacone mentioned, will go to the microphone there in the audience. But if you're watching on the live stream, you can also be part of the question and answer process by using the email john.ramacone@ideastream.org. That's Ramacone, R-A-M-I-C-O-N-E, john.ramacone@ideastream.org if you want to email us a question for later on. At this point in time, I'd also like to thank our sponsors. Special thanks to the Tecovas Foundation, the Key Bank Foundation, and Dominion Energy Charitable Foundation. And I'd also like to acknowledge the collaborating organizations, once again, that produce this series: the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, Hiram College, WVIZ PBS Idea Stream, and the Western Reserve Historical Society. Now, these sponsors and organizations are dedicated to diversity and the proposition that all men and women are created equal. Black history is an important part of American history and Cleveland's history. And by reliving and remembering the achievements of the four Clevelanders who are part of this series, we come to understand the struggles and challenges of African Americans who overcame in this country. Their perseverance serves as an inspiration for all of us. We hope that you who are watching will pay close attention to the traits and the innovative methods of these heroes and sheroes. Many of their qualities, including hard work, integrity, determination, and activism, are still vital ingredients of personal and professional success. We're all connected to the rich history of this nation, and by celebrating Black History Month, everyone can be included in a tradition of acknowledgement, inclusion, and community engagement. And thank you to our partners and sponsors for making it possible for us to share this experience with you.
Welcome to IdeaStream's second annual Black History Month program. This year's program series is sponsored by the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, the Tecovas Foundation, Dominion East Ohio Gas Company, and the Key Bank Foundation. Our program is originating from the Westfield studio at the Idea Center here in Playhouse Square. Dee Perry of IdeaStream will host and moderate each program. Professors from the Hiram College will be our guest presenters for each of the four programs, and our in-house audience will consist of students from the Cleveland Metropolitan School District and other Northeast Ohio districts. Other students across Northeast Ohio will participate in the program via a live stream. Special thank you to Judy Como-Hart, Mary Cromer, and Maisie Adams of the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, and Linda Williams and John Ramacone of WVIZ Idea Stream Education Department for their behind-the-scenes work in creating this outstanding educational and community engagement opportunity. We hope you enjoyed today's program, and we look forward to you participating in the programs scheduled for each Wednesday throughout the month of February.
Hello, my name is Mark Druckenbrode, and I am president of the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation. We are very pleased to bring you this series of lectures on prominent African Americans buried at Lakeview Cemetery. These individuals contributed economically, culturally, and civically to Northeast Ohio, the nation, and the world. We are pleased to collaborate with Hiram College, the History Center at Western Reserve Historical Society, and WVIZ PBS Idea Stream. And special thanks to our sponsors, the Tecovas Foundation, Dominion Energy Charitable Foundation, and Key Bank Foundation. Black History Month has become an important part of Lakeview Cemetery's educational programming, in which we promote positive examples of historical events, exemplary leaders, and progress toward social change. This month is not only deeply meaningful for the African American community, but imperative for all of us to gain a better understanding of our nation and the world. By reliving and remembering Black history, we create awareness of the struggles and challenges that African Americans overcame in this country. Their perseverance serves as an inspiration for all. Every race is connected to the rich history of this nation, and by celebrating Black History Month, everyone can be included in a tradition of acknowledgement, inclusion, and community engagement. Thank you for your presence today.
Hello, my name is Judy Como Hart, Executive Director of the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation. On behalf of the Tecovas Foundation, I would like to read a statement from Trustee Alexander S. Taylor II, who could not be with us today but wanted to express the Foundation's support of this project. With great honor, the Tecovas Foundation is thrilled to be the lead sponsor of this great lecture series, profiling these extraordinary African Americans who greatly contributed to the civic, cultural, and economic life of Cleveland and the nation. In collaboration with the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, Hiram College, the History Center, Western Reserve Historical Society, WVIZ PBS IdeaStream, the Key Bank Foundation, and the Dominion Energy Charitable Foundation, we believe in the importance and value of this project. Our foundation has deep roots in Cleveland, and we have always cared about the welfare of this city. We believe that people have the capacity to solve their own problems, but they often don't have access to the tools they need to make the change they seek. We are committed to helping organizations working on similar issues find each other, have productive dialogue, and work together to achieve their mutual goals. Therefore, we find value in the collaborative effort of this project to raise awareness of these magnificent African Americans who overcame many obstacles to achieve great goals in their lives. In doing so, we hope to teach you all about the promise of this country, that all men and women are created equal. We hope you are inspired by their stories. And moving forward in your own lives, we hope you realize all things are achievable through hard work, discipline, and perseverance. Thank you for allowing the Tecovas Foundation to be part of this great endeavor.
Good morning. I am Heather Clayton Terry, Philanthropy Coordinator for Dominion Energy. It is my privilege to join with Key Bank Foundation on presenting Lakeview Cemetery's Black History Month lecture series. This program provides a wonderful opportunity to recognize the achievements of some truly exceptional men and women as part of our celebration of Black History Month. These contributions are important regionally, nationally, and internationally. Dominion Energy Ohio sponsored this collaboration in order to provide a unique learning experience. Through this program, we look to raise awareness of outstanding leaders and to expose students to people whose lives were both rich and diverse. It is our hope that the hundreds of participating students pay close attention to the traits and innovative methods of these heroes. Many of their attributes, including hard work, vision, integrity, and determined spirit, are still vital ingredients of personal and professional success. Dominion Energy incorporates diversity and inclusion as a key component of our business as well, making decisions based off multiple perspectives and a range of ideas just makes sense. In fact, we host a number of employee resource groups, including an African American group, women's group, Latino group, and veterans group to celebrate workplace diversity and inclusion. We follow the guiding principles of respect, fairness, and consistency to ensure our work environment is one in which every team member is valued so that our corporate culture attracts, develops, and retains the best and brightest employees. We are a proud partner of this lecture series and look forward to continuing to serve our employees, customers, and students across the region. Thank you and enjoy today's program.
Hi, my name is Kim Manigault, and I am the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Key Bank. On behalf of Key Bank and our thousands of Cleveland employees, Thank you for joining us in sharing the rich history of Cleveland's notable African American leaders during Black History Month. These stories will inspire and make you think about our city and our shared culture and history. We are pleased to partner again this year with Lakeview Cemetery on this important program. Lakeview Cemetery is an historic landmark with deep roots in Cleveland's past and the extraordinary people who built this city. At Key Bank, diversity and inclusion is woven into our corporate fabric. It is reflected in our workforce, our workplace, and our marketplace. This project provides the opportunity for Key Bank to link arms across our community as we celebrate Black History Month. On behalf of my colleagues at Key Bank, I want to say we are honored to participate in this community effort as it reflects who we are as a company. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your Black History Month celebration.
And we're going to hear about the history maker who's featured in today's presentation, a woman who fought to make life better for everyone in her community, Councilwoman Fannie Lewis. And here to tell us more of Mrs. Lewis's story is Dr. Megan Altman, an assistant professor of philosophy at Hiram College. Dr. Altman.
Good morning. Hi. I would like to start out by thanking Lakeview Cemetery for inviting me to participate in their events commemorating Black History Month by recollecting and memorializing the dedication and sacrifice of extraordinary African American members of the community. In particular, I would like to thank Mary and Macy at Lakeview Cemetery, as well as WVIZ here at IdeaStream, and in particular, the members of the audience. I would like to thank the students for coming out here today, the students and the teachers, and celebrating the life of Fannie Lewis. I am truly humbled and honored to be here. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with you about Fannie Lewis, whose perseverance in trying times of blatant racism, dedication, and commitment to improving and building up the African American community in the greater Cleveland area can teach us about love for humanity, the work of freedom, and above all, how to live a life of service, contributing to the various communities to which one belongs. My hope is that in honoring Fannie Lewis, we will continue her work of helping others and facing the urgent challenges of our times. I have in mind specifically the pressing racial issues of our times. So the beginnings. Fannie Lewis was raised in a religious family in Memphis, Tennessee during the time of poll taxes and segregated drinking fountains. Those were the bad times, she recalled in an interview. In Tennessee, she worked in a laundry after school, as well as in the fields where workers picked up to 300 pounds of cotton per day. She was trained as a cosmetologist, and at the age of 19, she married Carly Lewis. After Carly returned from a stint in the Marines in 1951, the couple moved to Huff to escape the oppression of the South. They lived in a roach-infested hovel belonging to a relative until they could afford a place of their own. They separated in the early 60s and finally were divorced in 1972. So Miss Lewis found herself alone trying to support 5 children on the salary of a shirt presser. Quoting Miss Lewis, she said, "Oh, I just didn't know how I was going to make it. I was getting fired every time I turned around for making smart remarks. I was a hard worker, but I was very withdrawn. Didn't talk to nobody, didn't visit nobody." However, she made a name for herself as the racial tensions escalated in 1966 into what became known as the Huff Riots. The Huff Riots were an outbreak of violence that have been characterized by vandalism, looting, arson, and sporadic gunfire. There had been racial disturbances earlier in the summer. However, these events proved to be more serious and widespread. So the riots were sparked by a dispute over a glass of water at the 79ers Cafe at Huff Avenue and East 79th Street on the evening of July 18th, which escalated until the police were unable to deal with the situation. So as the crowds grew larger, rock throwing, looting, vandalism gradually spread throughout the Huff area. In the following evening, the violence was repeated with fires set in the area as well as reports of sniper fire. And at the request of the mayor, the National Guard moved into Huff on the morning of July 20th to restore order, and the mayor closed all bars and taverns. After a major fire at Cedar and East 106th Street, things slowly returned to normal, and on Monday, July 25th, those stores in the Huff area that had escaped serious damage reopened, and the National Guard was gradually released from duty. During the riots, 4 people were killed, about 30 were injured, and close to 300 were arrested. Approximately 240 fires were reported. There was no evidence that the riots had been planned or controlled by any radical groups in Cleveland. However, once they began, extremists were in a position to exploit them. The events in Huff were part of a national pattern of racial tension and frustration, which produced violence in many parts of the country in 1966. So I wanted to contextualize the Huff riots, right, and help you see, right, Cleveland's contribution, right, to the larger national civil rights movement. In 1966, so around between 1965 and 1967, right, there was the rise of the Black Panther Party and more of a rise of a Black empowerment movement. And in 1967, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right, he actually began to embrace the anti-racist idea of Black power. So there were plenty of other riots going on in the country in 1966. There were the Division Street riots in Chicago, Illinois, the Omaha riot, there were riots in Chicago, the West Side riots, Marquette Park housing riots, Waukegan riots, Benton Harbor riots, and the list goes on and on. The Huff riots not only demonstrate the ways in which Cleveland played a pivotal role in the national scene, the national civil rights movement, but the Huff riots are also a pivotal moment and turning point in the life of Fannie Lewis. Immediately following the Huff riot in 1966, she gained public attention when she was photographed talking to some of the roughly 1,700 National Guard troops that were dispatched in the neighborhood to restore order. Following the Huff riot, she took a more active role in the community when she became a recruiter for the Neighborhood Youth Corps. That's a project to help people find work. And then she ran for city council 5 times and won in 1979 and began her term in 1980. And she maintained that position until her death in 2008. During her activist role, her activist period, the Cleveland Press asked her about her memoirs, and she said that she was working on them and that she would probably title them either Levels of My Life or My Life in the Cesspool. So I've incorporated this slide, these quotes, as a moment for us to reflect on the life of Fannie Lewis, on where she's at in her own life as well as her place in the community, the greater community of Cleveland. She took a leap, she made a leap, right, from concerned citizen to political candidate during the urban renewal, which was a phenomenon that was properly known as the Negro removal. I know, that was not a comfortable thing to say, let alone acknowledge, right? But the entire residential blocks on Huff were demolished practically overnight to accommodate vague plans for residential and corporate development. But development didn't follow demolition, and the remaining residents were confronted with weedy, empty lots where their neighborhoods once lived. In 1971, when Fannie Lewis first ran for city council, she said, "I wanted to help homeowners stay in this neighborhood, close to downtown, close to the lake, to the University Circle, close enough to walk. That's what I've always wanted to maintain. I've walked all my life. That's why my legs are giving out." And friends recall her striding some 50 blocks down Superior to work, decked out in dress and tennis shoes. What really fired her up was that Star Avenue had a standing appointment with the wrecking ball. Half the street had already been torn down, and her half was next. "I was protecting my house," she said. "That's what kept me running. I didn't want to move anymore. I don't like to move." She said that in 1971, and then in 2001, she said that she has always run for office to save her house, that she was still running to save her house in 2001. She saw homeownership and the youth as the future of the neighborhood. And Lewis became an institution. Her name is etched in the minds of people who knew her, and it's chiseled in Cleveland's law books. She attempted to stop the demolition of public housing in Cleveland in 1982. And during that time, she claimed, quote, "We survived the rats, the roaches, and the riots, and we will survive Reaganomics." She was a major supporter of a school voucher program in Cleveland because she believed it gave children the opportunity to attend a better school. And despite challenges, the United States Supreme Court upheld that voucher program in 2002. She was responsible for the Fannie Lewis Law. The Fannie Lewis Law took in effect in January of 2004. This law requires that city residents are to make up at least 20% of the workforce on a construction project where the city contract is above $100,000. To quote Lewis, she said, "I had a plan when I went into council. I drew a map of the ward and showed how we are surrounded by all of this development over the lake, how we were right in the middle of downtown, the Cleveland Clinic, and the University Circle, and whatever in the middle was important. One part of my plan to save Huff was to make sure people didn't lose their homes." And, end quote. She gained national attention when she was featured in the 2004 documentary titled "No Umbrella, Election Day in the City." This is a documentary that focuses on voting problems in Cleveland, and it focused on those voting problems specifically in the year 2004. Much of the film focused on Lewis's efforts to get more voting machines for her ward, where many people were forced to wait in long lines in the rain in order to vote. The director of the documentary, Laura Paglin, she remembers, right, upon arriving in Cleveland on voting day, she noticed that, at least in certain parts of Cleveland, right, voting was much more complicated, to say the least. She originally positioned herself on the sidewalk in front of the polls, and she said, I did this because I didn't want to be obnoxious, right, sticking my camera and people coming out if anything was going wrong, right? But then she was asking people as they were coming out, is everything okay, how's it going, right? And they were saying, it's terrible in there, it's awful. Someone said it was like being invited to someone's house, right? I don't understand exactly what that means. But What she found inside, right, and captured on camera was a room full of disgruntled people. Some were in tears, others were arguing with one another. They had been waiting in line to vote for at least an hour and a half. And then Lewis appears. She appears outraged, and she began to make phone calls demanding more voting machines. And when 10 primitive-looking devices arrived later that day, the inserts, right, that were necessary to for using those voting machines, those inserts were nowhere to be found. Lewis got back on the phone, right, and she said, "It's like we prayed for rain and didn't bring no umbrella. Now we have to stand in the downpour." Hence the title of the documentary, No Umbrella. To wrap up some highlights from Lewis's life, right, one of the issues that she was passionate about was the rehabilitation of League Park in the Huff neighborhood. She was confident that the city of Cleveland could complete the task, and she said, quote, "I'm not questioning whether it will. I know it will. It's just a matter of finally putting this all together. It's really something that once you put your hands on it, you really can't discard it. If you keep the spirit of it alive, I know that restoring the park, right, would still be possible. It's going to happen." She was also passionate about sharing her personal experiences with others, and she was open about the fact that she was on welfare early on in her life. She said, quote, "Surviving that experience has helped me to help others get off the merry-go-round, to dig for dignity, and to feel comfortable in sharing their experiences. I came to do a job, and that job is with whomever and whatever my hands find to work with. I must take it and make whatever I need to move on in this life, looking for a better world." In 1966, she was inducted into the Ohio Women's Hall of Fame. Oh, there we go. This is the psalm that was open on her casket at her funeral. Right? This is a very common passage from the Bible to present, to display at a funeral. However, there's something that's extraordinary about it in the case of Fannie Lewis. I think that her life, right, was certainly not ordinary, and reading this common ordinary passage in light of Lewis's earnest devotion to the African American community highlights the extraordinary meaning of what it means to shepherd. It has to do with nurturing and preserving the ties that bind us together. It involves preparing and staging commemorations, celebrations, where those who dwell together tell and retell stories of their particular lives. Shepherding consists in preserving the stories and their meaning as anchors to shifting personal and group identity. But the narratives of the history of what brought us here are not fixed. Therefore, part of the moral and creative task is to reconstruct the connection of the past to the present in the light of news events, relationships, and political understandings. And I think that Fannie Lewis's life shows us how to do that. It shows us how to shepherd a community in a way that includes the marginalized, the dishonorable, and those who are deemed unworthy of respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Altman. And in a few minutes, you'll have a chance to ask Dr. Altman questions about her presentation. But before we do that, a couple of other things. In your programs here in the studio, there is a notes section, questions that you can consider as you think about what you've just heard about this activist in the community and how that might translate to your life, and also some links that you can follow as you think about those questions. But in the meantime, we want to show you some items from the Western Reserve Historical Society collection that'll give you some more information about Fannie Lewis's life and times. And leading that demonstration will be Chad Malkamaki, the lead interpreter at the Cleveland History Center of the Western Reserve Historical Society. Chad?
And just in case you don't know who we are at the Cleveland History Center, we are Cleveland's oldest existing cultural institution. We've been around for over 150 years, collecting the tangible history of Northeast Ohio. So what that means, we have everything from diaries, we have religious records from churches and synagogues throughout the area. We also have family papers, but we also highlight our political collections that we have that include Miss Lewis's papers. But one of the challenges when you work with a collection, you never know what you're going to find. And when I went to our archives, one of the things that we have to help researchers are finding aids that go folder by folder through the collection. And our collection for Miss Lewis was donated to us in the 1980s, and it covers the years from the late 1960s through 1976. So it doesn't have her actual career as a councilwoman on Cleveland City Council. The collection itself is 19 containers. These are very large banker's boxes that weigh about 30 pounds. Inside the boxes, you have probably 20 different folders that are itemized throughout her life. One of the things that we were able to learn as an institution, we do have other collections that she gave to us, and working with our manuscripts manager to bring the items out today, we now discovered that we need to process and make available to researchers the rest of the collection that tells the full story of Miss Lewis. So because of this program with Lakeview Cemetery, doing our own research, we have more tangible history that we'll have available for researchers, for students, for teachers, available at the museum. But the first document, because Ms. Lewis, can we go to the PowerPoint? Is some of her campaign materials. And this is one of the more formal items. We'll see one document that looks like something you could use in your classroom if you were running for class president. But this was a formal printed document. I love her slogan, "I'm okay, you're okay. Let's work together with a new councilwoman in our new ward." This ended up not being the ward. Over the years, the different wards in the city of Cleveland, their boundaries changed. She was eventually elected in 1979 to Ward 7. But inside, it talks about some of her issues that she would cover, giving some of her life history. I love a key component, and one of the things that Mrs. Lewis was known for was quoting the Bible and using her religion as an anchor to her life and to her political career. So she talks about being a member of the Church of Christ at 108th Street in Cedar, and it was through her work at the church that it would lead naturally into her community activism over the years. But also when you look at her first point she points out is her family. She was a working mother while she was doing all this work around the city of Cleveland, in the community of Huff, and eventually on the Cleveland City Council. She even served sometime working with special congressional committees in Washington, D.C., and working hand in hand with Mayor Perk, Mayor Kucinich, and Mayor Voinovich over the years. And then, of course, all of our other mayors and council members that she worked with. But her family was always what she was looking out for, as we heard in the previous talk. So this is a document that I said, it looks like something that you could make for your school project. It was hand-drawn. It has the words that she focuses on: peace, love, unity, power, and progress. When she ran for council in 1971, she had a contest for the members. And in this ward, she was really basing it off of her street and the immediate streets. She would go to door, but she had a contest for people to draw campaign flyers for her. And unfortunately, those were a little bit more delicate because they were on lighter types of paper. But we had the submissions that were sent to Fannie Lewis, and it would turn into some of her campaign signs and campaign materials. So this was really a grassroots effort of her working hand in hand with the members of the community. But again, I love it because it looks like something that you would see hanging in a school. And again, this is another more formal document. And again, this is from her 1971 run. She ran for the primary in 1978, and 1971 on September 28th. And one of the points was voters, getting voters out to the actual polls to vote. And she recognized early on that became a common thread, not just in local politics, but in national politics as well, is candidates need people to actually go out and physically get those votes in. So with this document, we ended up, one of the things we do with archives collections is try to take any metal off of paper, so staples, paper clips, and sometimes, even when we process those collections, those things sneak through, and this originally had a little reminder card for people to hang on their refrigerators that was stapled on, and on the right below the street address, you can actually see where that staple was located. So that's one of the important works that when we talk about a collection going from on-process to process is, besides organizing it and making it thematic, is also protecting these documents so they'll last, like our organization has been around for over 150 years. Now, the next document, I think, I know I chose it because it's so relevant to what's going on today, but I want to open it out, and just feel free to shout out the answer if you know it. But it deals with police brutality. So what are some of the names that you know from the last couple years of individuals that were killed by police or attacked by police? Does anyone have a name? Yeah. Eric Garner, excellent. Anyone else in the back? Trayvon Martin, excellent. Tamir Rice, right here in our own community in Cleveland. We have one more in the back, I see. Excellent job. Good job paying attention to what's going on in current events. And this is a document that's over 40 years old, but it happened in the summer of 1975. On June 6th, a young man had a motorcycle. He had bought it from his friend. He had the paperwork and registration. As far as he knew, this was a legal bicycle or motorcycle that he was riding through the city of Cleveland. Unfortunately, a previous owner, 2 times before he purchased that bike, stole the bike from another individual. The police started chasing him, and their solution was to pull a shotgun out of their window and shoot this young man in the back, a 20-year-old individual. That whole summer of 1975 was a series of protests, including Fannie Lewis being very active in the community. So this is a petition, one of the blank forms that was used to petition Mayor Perk to make sure that police officer was fired. In the history of the case, going back through the Plain Dealer, I went to the Plain Dealer archives that you can access at the Cleveland Public Library right here in our own community. Or if you want to use the old forms of technology, you can come to the Historical Society and use our microfilm, where it's going through and slowly looking at each page of the paper. But I was able to quickly look up this individual's name. His name was Derek Brown. And almost like Tamir Rice that we know from a couple years ago, every single day from June 6th until August 28th, when the police officer went up for trial, there was coverage. And Miss Lewis was very active. She was quoted many times at some of these different rallies, and as well as going door to door to collect signatures. So this is, again, community action, but again, it's that story 40 years later, we're still talking about these issues today. And here's a flyer for the rally that was held downtown at Cleveland Public Square that lists not just Derek Brown, but other young individuals. And you'll look at their ages, they're 19, 20, 21 years old that have been attacked or killed by police officers. Just 11 days before Derek Brown was killed, another young man was killed on Memorial Day weekend. And Mrs. Lewis was a part of this rally, an organization, also because Derek Brown was a motorcyclist. Other motorcycle clubs from out Northeast Ohio went to the rally, marched down to Public Square, and then turned around and took the rally and marched down Euclid Avenue up to Payne Avenue to the Central Police Department. So again, this is active current events that we talk about today. These were issues that were going back 40 years ago. And then this last document is a connection that I see going back to the history of civil rights in Cleveland. It's a protest at university hospitals calling university hospitals racist for how they treat their employees and how the patients are treated. And when you look at a lot of our elected officials from Cleveland, some of their key things they look for is health care. This has been a continual thing. Housing, strong families, education. This was also key components of Carl and Lewis Stokes, 2 brothers. Carl Stokes was the first African-American mayor of the city of Cleveland and the first African-American mayor of a major city, and his older brother Lewis was the first black Democrat from the state of Ohio. And these were important issues for them as well as many of our other politicians. But a lot of this tradition goes back to an organization called the Future Outlook League that was organized by a gentleman named John Hawley back in the 1930s and 1940s. So most of us think of the civil rights movement starting with the Montgomery bus boycott, with the work of Dr. King, down south in the southern part of the United States in the 50s and 60s. But we did have activists working in Cleveland. And the motto of the Future Outlook League was, "Don't buy where you can't work." So again, I see this direct correlation between items that were important to Ms. Lewis as well as what was going on in the history of Cleveland. And that Don't Buy Where You Can't Work campaign was really looking at businesses that were open in the African American community that wouldn't employ African American individuals, from grocery stores to eventually the telephone company, and they fought for jobs and got jobs for people in their community. So again, you see this long tradition of activism in the city of Cleveland that helped guide the way our politicians helped our community, and it would eventually trickle down to the people on the streets, and that was always what was important to Ms. Lewis. I know Mr. Ramacone talked about having an organized way of getting down to the pizza, but I do encourage you, if you have time, come down to the table. These documents you can touch, and it's one of the great things when you do research at an archives library. You can touch these things that we have and touch a piece of history and a part of history. But thank you for coming out to the program today.
And once again, thank you to Chad Malkamaki. And Chad, if you'll come back up as well as Dr. Altman, because I want you to both be part of the question and answer session, because what happens now is you get a chance to ask questions about Councilwoman Lewis and the work that she did for her community. And if you have a question here in the studio, you can step up to the microphone right there. And if you have one from the live stream, remember that the email to send the question to is john.ramacone@ideastream.org. Again, that's john.ramacone@ideastream.org. And while we're waiting for our first questioner to come to the microphone, something occurred to me from the things that I had read. I know Fannie Lewis won election to Cleveland City Council in the fall of 1979, but it seems like earlier that year, Mayor Dennis Kucinich put her up for a seat on the RTA board, and Cleveland City Council nixed that. They said, no, Fannie Lewis, and I didn't know if that was about the mayor or about Fannie Lewis. What kind of interaction did she have with Cleveland City Council before she became a council person?
Hold on. I do. It's a complicated relationship. I'm trying to recall right now because I read about 3 pages, right, on that relationship, and I couldn't weave a coherent narrative because I couldn't make sense of all of the actors and what was at stake in the conflict and the tensions. The only part that made sense, right, was what you were saying, that she was elected and then, and then that was blocked. I think it had more to do. Actually, I'm not going to even. I don't want to be wrong.
But I know she was a very outspoken person, did not bite her tongue about anything. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I would imagine that when she was on the city council, that that the conversations between her and her colleagues were pretty feisty.
And as I say, one thing I would add to that is that you have to remember also that Mayor Kucinich came from city council, and from what I understand, that was George Forbes and Dennis Kucinich and some of their political rivalry that happened on council before then Ms. Lewis got involved in council in the 80s then.
Yeah, so it was
a complicated issue.
Yes. And we have someone standing at the microphone now.
How old? Oh, right. I'm Layla, and I go to Campus International, and I was wondering how old Fannie Lewis was when she won council.
Oh, that's a good question. That was 1979. She was born. When was she born?
1926.
1926. So 53.
Okay.
Did I do that correctly? Yes, I did. I think so. Woo! Yes, 53.
So, I am Jonah from Campus International, and I may have misheard you, but I believe you said that the Huff riots started with a dispute over a glass of water.
Uh-huh.
But you didn't go into much detail about it. Could you?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, I can. I have my notes, if you don't mind me grabbing my notes, because that, again, right, it's not that it's complicated so much as there are several different accounts, right? All right, so you want the whole backstory? Okay, all right. The 79ers Cafe, it was a white-owned bar out the southeast corner of 79th and Huff. And it was a popular bar with the African-American community of the Huff area. The owners, so let me see. All right, I'll give you the whole backstory. So the 79ers, right, they suffered a number of problems, including drug dealing, sale of stolen goods, prostitution, right? And the owners had started to bar and ban certain individuals from the establishment. And there were local prostitutes, Margaret Sullivan and her friend Louise, and they were among those who were banned. Sullivan died on July 16th, and she left 3 young children. On July 17th, Louise attempted to leave a box at the bar so patrons could donate money and care to help take care of Sullivan's children. The owners refused to allow Louise to collect donations for the care of Sullivan's children. And they argued with her, right? And in that argument, they used racist and defamatory language, and she was thrown out. And later on, there were racially charged incidents that occurred, and there are 3 different accounts of what occurred, right? But the general idea, right, is that, or not idea, but the general picture, right, that you get is that the owners denied water to an African-American man who had entered the bar. And later on, after denying him a drink of water, they put a sign out saying no water for explicit, right? Yeah. And that is hence what, in part, provoked, right? There's that whole history of the racial tensions and such, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thanks for the question. Next, at the microphone.
My name is Griffin. I go to Campus International. I have a question. When all the riots were going on, what was like the police response? Did they have like a positive response and wanted it to end, or do they have like one where they were like, it's okay and just get the National Guard and we don't care about it?
Do you want to talk to that?
I know some of the things that we have in the collection. Unfortunately, a lot of times it ended up being negative, that they just were blaming the whole community as a whole. And it ended up escalating to the point that the Ohio National Guard had to come in. And that was, again, the image that unfortunately I'm not sure where it is in history. I know it's not in our collections, or at least in the collections that are available to research, of Ms. Lewis going down and talking to the National Guard members on the street that ended up being published in the media. But a lot of times, there's so many stories that come out of the Huff riots, and you hear some good things and always there's 2 sides to every story. Some of the cops were going to protect citizens, but also there was a lot of negativity as well in their reactions, and that's eventually why the governor had the National Guard come into the neighborhood. Anything you want to?
No, that was about, yeah. Okay.
Hi, my name is Nicolette, and I go to Campus International. What was a quote that inspired you from Fannie Lewis, and was it positive to you or negative to you?
You have all the quotes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question. Because I was trying to, when I was constructing the narrative of her life, right, her life narrative, I was trying to focus on the themes of belongingness, togetherness, being at home, and indebtedness and shepherding, right? And I was trying to tie together that theme, right, and those really thick moral concepts, because I saw that throughout all of the quotes that I had read from Fannie Lewis. Like, I know her, I shouldn't, sorry about that. But my favorite was that quote that I used on the first slide, which, where she says, "Every day somebody will come along and shake your faith. They will shoot your attitude down. And the Lord says, if I am with you, that's more than the whole world against you."
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Hello. Hello, my name is Ahmad Bates. I go to Campus International, and I am wondering, I have two questions. Have you ever met Fannie Lewis in person, and were you inspired by her?
Unfortunately, I never got a chance to meet Mrs. Lewis at the museum. But inspiring things about Mrs. Lewis, again, is just her dedication to her immediate community, but also the whole city of Cleveland as well. That she was a very dedicated civil servant to the whole city, but with an emphasis on families at the immediate level on the streets.
And I was going to say, I did get a chance to meet her, and she was very smart and very tough, and she didn't like people to shine her on, like just be smiling in her face and doing something underhanded, and she would call you out on it every time. She knew if someone was real or if they were faking, and she was always a very tough advocate for her neighborhood. She knew everybody. If you walked with her down the street, she would know every name and what was going on in every family and every corner of her community. She was a terrific lady. And your other question?
Were you inspired by her?
Oh, yeah. I was intimidated by her, and I was inspired by her. I wanted to be as committed to something as she was and as tough as she was, but it's hard to be a Fannie Lewis, let me tell you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Isabella, and I came from Campus International. My question is, do you have information on her parents, like her parents' names or anything?
So, do you...
Again, in the archives collection, because it covers such a very short period of time, there wasn't a lot of biographical information on the family besides what she used in her campaign materials. So again, I'm in your research more.
Yeah. It was, I don't have her parents' names, right? And in all my research, it was hard to find so much detail, but once here and there I would write straight gold, right, and get a lot of detail about her life. And to be completely honest with you, if I had more time, right, in a world in which there's never-ending time, right, I would have just gotten in touch with her family, who are still in this area, and talked with them. And so that's on my list of things to do in honor of her, and because it's my responsibility, right? Yeah.
My name is Angelo, and I go to Campus International Schools. I have two questions. One, do you know how long she ran for as the council?
You can speak.
Yeah, it was started in 1971. She didn't actually win until 1979, but she served, she was still a councilwoman when she passed away in 2008. So she ended up serving over 28 years when she actively took her seat in 1980.
And my second question is, do you know how long she lived for?
From 1926 to 2008, 84? We're doing math on this.
Asking philosophers and historians to do math.
Yeah. Oh, this is embarrassing. Yeah. 26 to 8, so 82. 82. Yeah. Jeez. No more math questions.
Hi, my name is Kara Harrison, and I go to Warrensville Heights High School. I was wondering, because Fannie M. Lewis was such a big advocate, what do you think kids, not just females, but kids in general, could do to follow in her footsteps?
You go. I'll go after.
Really just being engaged. She was such an active participant in what was going on in everyday life and actually paying attention to her neighbors. I know in this day and age with social media, we tend to just focus on your friend groups that you have, whatever social media you're using. But she actually wanted to go out door to door to her neighbors. Also going to meetings, going to church activities, going to government meetings and the city hall debates and being engaged with the politicians. Don't let the politicians just be on one side of the aisle. They serve our community, they work for us, so go and engage them and bring your problems to them because that's what their job is. And that's really, looking back at her early start in the career, she noticed these problems in her community and took an active role to try to solve those problems.
And I'd say another thing is what you're doing right now. She always asked questions. She wanted to not just accept things at face value because someone said that's the way it is. She wanted to know why. And if it wasn't to her liking, she wanted to figure out how she could change it. So keep asking questions.
Thank you.
Oh, can I just add one thing? I'm in line with what you both said, right? And doing what you're doing, which is learning your history, right? And knowing the history of your community, of your state, local community, as well as the wider, right, larger community, and being engaged in that way as well. So just exactly doing what you're doing, right? Yeah.
Good morning. Good morning. I have two questions. First of all, well, one statement and a question. I had the privilege of growing up with three of Fannie M. Lewis's grandsons. We're still friends today. And just in that experience, I went to her house and I was able to have dinner with her at times, play with her grandsons. And she was a very stern woman. She was very intimidating, like you said. Like, without words, she can intimidate you as a kid anyway. Also, you talked about the Huff riots, and I have a question that concerning the Huff riots. And I think that our young students really need to understand this. I have a hard time listening to media outlets or narratives being given about riots. And the reason is because this is a country that every 4th of July celebrates what would be labeled a riot. The Huff riot, Freddie Gray's riot in Baltimore, the riots in Milwaukee, they all did the same exact thing that those people that were participated in the Boston Tea Party or the Boston massacres did. They fought against what they perceived to be an injustice or a misrepresentation of their community. And I think that was one of the things that I learned from Ms. Lewis and other elders that were around me, that just because the outside people call it a riot, if in your heart you feel that it's a fight for an injustice, then it's okay to do. And don't let media or any other outlet determine your actions based off of what type of response they want to give the public about your actions. So that, how do you feel about that? Do you see that same correlation between the Huff Riot and the Boston Massacre?
I have a question with that. Yeah, I like that idea, right? And I'm on board. I just wonder how is a riot not a fight for justice and a fight against oppression and marginalization, right? Could we? I didn't think that it was necessarily, but I could see how, right? Like a riot would be, right?
Negative connotation.
And actually, I have a comment on that because a couple of years ago there was a play written using transcripts, voices from the Huff and incidents, and what they chose to call it was an uprising because it had a more positive connotation of people fighting against injustice, rising up against something that was oppressing them, as opposed to a riot, which seems totally negative. That is just wild violence with no spark to it, with no reason behind it. But there were decades of reasons behind it. So,
thank you.
That's interesting.
My question is, when you said that when the National Guard came and she went and talked to them, what did she talk to them about? Like, was she asking why they were there, or?
Yeah, it was just a picture they ended up being, and I don't know the context of.
no, I was wondering the same thing, but I haven't seen it written down anywhere what she actually talked to them about, and I wonder if it's in the papers that would have been her memoirs.
And that's, again, and going back to the last comment about how we look at the Huff incidents, that's the importance of why we need to preserve archival history and what I brought here today, and the fact that it's not, let's face it, when we look at most of American history, it's dead white guy history, and why it's important to have collections like Mrs. Lewis's collection that we have here today, and why it's going to be so important to processing that we could end up having her manuscripts to her autobiographies that were never published. And I think that's where we have to go and look for the answer. So that's why it's such a great thing that I hope our manager continues on to process that collection, just so we can learn that history that's kind of hidden, and it's in boxes, and we don't know what's there until we process it.
Right. And we're almost out of time. I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Ariane Thomas, and I teach 7th and 8th grade at Campus International. I actually had the same question to a man before me, and I'm just going to reiterate what he said about thinking about being really intentional about language. So I was thinking about the Tulsa race riots is sometimes what they're referred to, and there's been a movement to start calling them Tulsa burning, because it was a systemic just elimination of an entire black community is what it really was. But my question is, what happened to the police officer who murdered the young man? You mentioned they tried to get him fired, so my question was he fired? Was he charged?
He was charged, and one of the articles from the Plain Dealer, so the incident happened June 6th. It was by the end of June. He was indicted by the grand jury, and they believe that is one of the first times, not just in Cleveland history, but even national history, that a police officer was charged with murder. The trial was held and ended in August, so it was a very swift trial. This incident happened in June of 1975. By August, it went before a jury, and the jury ended up acquitting the police officer. I didn't have enough time because I just was going through the archives last night, because unfortunately, like I said, the microfilm just takes so much longer to read every single page of a newspaper over even just from June to August, so it was easier to go to the Plain Dealer, but like I said, it's a great archives collection that's available at the public library system, and I encourage you to do more research on it. It's a story that I've been in the greater Cleveland area my whole life, and I never knew about this incident until I discovered that document about the petition. So again, it's going to have to take a little more digging, but I know he at least did go to trial, though.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, Chad Malkamaki and Dr. Megan Altman. Really interesting having you, and thank you all for your great questions. I wish we had more time. But next week we will present 2 final programs in this special series that focus on the Call and Post publisher William O. Walker and a woman who was many, many things, Dr. Zelma Watson George. For today, thank you for your participation, and thank you for being here. Enjoy your lunch and travel safely.